Did you know that Donald Trump's decisive win in the New Hampshire primary against Nikki Haley with a double-digit victory of 54.5% to Haley's 43.2% was in fact a jarring warning sign that his campaign is in real trouble? Shocking thing to say, I know, but that is precisely what the spin masters for the news networks are telling us. This seems worthy of investigating, don't you think? Marc Thiessen, an American conservative author, political appointee, and weekly columnist for The Washington Post, was on Fox News recently to discuss how Trump's double-digit victory in New Hampshire was, in fact, not a good night at all for the former president. Here is what he said.
You just showed the stats. 35% of Republicans in this state are not going to vote for Donald Trump. He's bleeding centrist. He needs those Haley voters. She's the only candidate who has shown in polls, in several polls, to have a double-digit lead over Biden. So, you know, her argument is, do you want to go with your heart or do you want to go with your head?
Okay, so Marc Thiessen is telling us that this is bad news for Donald Trump. Let's break this down. In the New Hampshire primary, the voter turnout was record-breaking with more than 300,000 voters participating. Out of those who voted, Republican voters made up roughly 50%, and 75% of these Republicans voted for Donald Trump. That's 3 out of every 4. The other half of the voters were independents, and Nikki Haley won that group by 58%. Now, the thing is, in the state of New Hampshire, the independents make up approximately 39.9% of registered voters. This makes them the largest group of voters in the state, outnumbering both registered Democrats, who have 30.2%, and Republicans, who have 29.8%. Now, why this matters is, according to polling data collected from 1999 to 2014, about 45% of independent voters in New Hampshire consistently vote Democrat, while about 40% consistently vote Republican. See, if you think that Democrat voting independents didn't come out in force to try and mess with the primary election process, think again. Of course they would. Any dyed-in-the-wool anti-Trumpist would relish the opportunity to take it to Donald Trump. In fact, CNN amazingly aired this little exchange with an independent voter in the final minutes leading up to the polls closing in New Hampshire. Take a look.
Nikki Haley.
And why did you vote for Nikki Haley?
It's a vote against Trump. I think it would be better to have her against Biden in the elections than it would be Trump and her.
Do you consider yourself generally independent, Republican, or Democrat?
Democrat.
So when you undeclared, you voted for Nikki Haley. If it was Nikki Haley against Joe Biden in a general election, who are you voting for?
Joe Biden.
So, okay. So what are we talking about here? Of course, Democrat independents were voting last night. This was happening. We know this. Which, of course, by the way, means that Donald Trump telling his supporters that Democrats would be voting in the primary was the truth. So this then brings us back to Marc Thiessen, and I want to discuss what he said about Nikki Haley polling data, which shows her beating Biden by double digits, while at the same time trying to say that Trump in similar polling data is only up by 2 to 3 points. Now, I'm sorry, but if you have 69% of Republicans polling as supporting the former president, while Haley is barely scraping by with 12% of potential primary voters, meaning Republicans, in the same survey, how in the world are you getting the leap of logic here that Haley, who is getting decimated in the Republican primary, will somehow poll better in the general? I mean, we can take this argument on its head and say, well, you know, she's only got 12% of support with the Republicans, so that means nearly 90% of them are polling against her. So what are we talking about here? Do you really think that people who strongly disapprove of the direction of this country is headed in will vote to keep the disaster train going? And I want to point something else out here. The current president, Joe Biden's approval rating is at historic lows. His net approval rating is the lowest for a president since Harry Truman. That means that Jimmy Carter was polling better than President Biden. Now, why does this matter? Well, you see, in the 1980 United States presidential election, the then incumbent Democratic president Jimmy Carter was destroyed by Republican candidate Ronald Reagan, who won by a landslide, securing 489 electoral votes compared to Carter's 49. This was the worst performance by an incumbent president since Herbert Hoover lost to Franklin D. Roosevelt in 1932. Now, the 1980 election was influenced by several main factors. These included the Iran hostage crisis and an absolute garbage economy. So think about this. Biden is polling worse than Jimmy Carter. And as well he should. Aside from the fact that he seems to be suffering from some sort of dementia.
We'll teach Donald Trump a valuable lesson. Don't mess with the women in America unless you want to get the benefit.
The country is and has been in free fall since he took the reins over in January of 2021. And his VP, Kamala Harris? Honestly, I don't know anyone who likes her. She's got to be the most unlikable VP in my lifetime. It's bad. And I want to point out one other thing here. Let's take a journey back to the 2016 primary season. Back then, media analysts and commenters were all over the place expressing their skepticism about Donald Trump's chances of winning the general election. Why? He was only polling a consistent 30% among Republican voters. Do you remember this? I do. They based their skepticism on several factors. First, analysts were pointing out that while Trump's 30% polling indicated a solid base of support within the Republican Party, it also suggested a ceiling that he might struggle to break through. They argued that Trump's controversial statements and unorthodox campaign style would alienate other voters, making it difficult for him to expand his support beyond that 30% base. Remember that? Then there was a belief that Trump's high unfavorability ratings among the general electorate would hinder his chances in the general election. Even as he led the Republican field, his favorability ratings at the time were middling among Republicans and poor among the broader electorate. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? And finally, there was a perception that Trump's campaign, while successful in garnering media attention, it lacked the organization and ground game typically needed to win a general election. They all thought this all the way up until election night, and the crying and the shock was unfiltered as their beliefs came crashing down. Even Hillary Clinton was so sure she was going to win that she had a massive fireworks show planned. In retrospect, those analysts underestimated several factors that contributed to Trump's victory in 2016. His appeal to disaffected voters, the impact of his media dominance, and the weaknesses of his opponents. Tell me this all doesn't sound so familiar. Except, in today's day and age, I'd argue we are in a much worse state as a country than we were in 2016. The economy is limping. Inflation is crushing the American people, and the massive influx of illegal aliens is a more pressing issue than it has ever been before in this country. The idea that Nikki Haley has a chance of taking this nomination away from Trump is absurd. It would take a miracle. No, scratch that. It would take many miracles for her to somehow overtake the former president. And if you think that Haley supporters, after this is all said and done, are not going to gravitate over to Trump, well, I mean, other than the dyed-in-the-wool Democrats that are voting with her. But no, the rest are going to go and they're going to vote for Donald Trump in the general election, just like they did in 2016. Now, I like to live in the real world, my friends. Deluding ourselves into thinking that New Hampshire was anything other than another step towards Trump's coronation in the primary is, well, just that, a delusion. Which, by the way, is where Nikki Haley is at right now. As Fox News reported, they said that despite the loss, Haley has vowed to stay in the race. She said, "You've all heard the chatter among the political class. They're falling all over themselves, saying this race is over. Well, I have news for all of them. New Hampshire is first in the nation. It is not last in the nation. This race is far from over." Nikki Haley is now shifting her focus to her home state of South Carolina, which will hold the next primary election on February 24th. But it doesn't look good for her there either. Trump, according to polling data, will likely get more than 50% of the vote there if things remain as they are. I honestly don't see a path to victory for Haley here. Doesn't seem like she has much of a prayer, does it? And that, my friends, will bring our episode to a close once more. From the To Be Frank show, I am Adrian. Thanks for watching. I'll see you all next time.